You're standing on it right now. That dry, pale sand that runs through your fingers like it wants nothing to do with you. You've watered it, you've begged it, and it swallowed everything and gave you back nothing but dust. Here's what I know now that I didn't know for almost 20 years. That sand under your boots can grow food. Not with a truckload of expensive topsoil. Not with bags of chemicals you buy every single spring. With a method so old it was written down before the fall of Rome, then quietly forgotten because there was no money in teaching it to you. By the end of this, I'll show you a technique recorded by a Dutch soil scientist in 1966 that turned the deadest ground on earth into black, living farmland. And I'll show you the very first step you can take tonight in your own yard with things you already own. I remember kneeling in my backyard outside Barstow, staring at a tomato plant that had gone yellow and crisp in 4 days, thinking the land itself was broken. It wasn't broken. I just didn't understand it yet. And this works on your patch of ground exactly as it is right now, not some perfect farm you'll never have. Let me tell you how I got here, because I was the most stubborn skeptic you'd ever meet. For years, I did it the modern way, the expensive way. Every spring, I'd drive to the garden center and load up my truck. Bags of potting mix, bags of raised bed soil, bags of compost with brand names and little green leaves printed on the plastic. I'd spend $300, sometimes $400 just to cover a strip of ground the size of a parking space. And I'd tell myself this was the year it would finally take. It never took. The water would pour straight through the sand like it was a sieve. By July, the imported soil had dried into gray crumbs and blown halfway to Arizona. The next spring, I'd go back and buy it all again. I was renting fertility by the season. I was paying over and over for something that refused to stay. And the whole time, I believed the story I'd been sold. That desert sand is simply dead. That the only way to grow anything in it is to bury it under soil trucked in from somewhere greener. That's the story that keeps a man coming back to the register every March with his wallet open. But that story is wrong, and I can prove it because the people who lived on sandy ground 2,000 years ago didn't have a garden center to run to. They had to fix the sand itself, and they figured out exactly how. There's a Roman writer named Columella. Around the year 60, in the first century, he wrote a 12-volume work on farming called De Re Rustica. On the farming shelves of history, it's one of the most detailed manuals ever written, and almost nobody alive today has heard his name. In those pages, Columella writes plainly that sandy soil is cured by mixing in clay, and heavy clay soil is cured by mixing in sand. He treated it as ordinary knowledge. Common sense. The kind of thing every farmer simply knew. Think about what that means. 2,000 years ago, a Roman farmer looking at loose, thirsty sand did not say the land is dead. He said the land is missing one ingredient, and he knew exactly what that ingredient was: clay. Now here's why that single word changes everything, and why nobody at the garden center will ever say it to you. Sand is made of large, round grains. Water runs between them and keeps going straight down past the roots, gone. Sand also can't hold on to nutrients because nutrients cling to surfaces, and sand grains are smooth and huge under a microscope. Clay is the opposite. Clay particles are unbelievably tiny and flat, thousands of times smaller than a grain of sand. They have enormous surface area. They grip water. They grip nutrients. They hold both right there in the root zone where a plant can actually drink and eat. Mix a modest amount of clay into pure sand and you change the physics of the ground itself. You're not feeding the plant once. You're building a soil that feeds it for years. I know how simple that sounds. I didn't believe it either. I thought if it were that easy, everyone would do it. But hold that thought, because the reason everyone stopped doing it is the part that made me angry once I understood it. Let me stay on the how for a moment, because I don't want to leave you with a nice idea and no instructions. The old practice even had a name in England. They called it marling. Marl is a natural mix of clay and lime found in pits across the countryside. Farmers would dig it out, haul it, and spread it across their light, sandy fields. This wasn't a rare trick. In the 16 and 1700s, it was so common across England that entire villages had marl pits, and old land records show men being paid specifically to dig and cart marl. There are estate accounts from that era listing marling as a regular expense, the way you'd list seed or labor. They marled a sandy field once, and that field grew better crops for 20, sometimes 30 years. One treatment, decades of return. A farmer would do it once in his life, and his son would still be reaping the benefit. So why have you never heard the word marl? Why did I spend 20 years buying bags of dirt when the fix was written down 400 years ago and practiced by ordinary farmers who couldn't even read? That's where the story turns. And this is the part I promised I wouldn't rush. Somewhere in the last 100 years, the way we grow things changed. Farming shifted from building the soil to feeding the plant. Instead of fixing the ground once so it stayed rich, the new approach was to pour soluble fertilizer onto poor ground every season. And you can see why that model won. There's no repeat sale in a field that fixes itself for 30 years. There's enormous, endless money in a bag you have to buy again every spring. The knowledge of building soil didn't die because it stopped working. It died because it worked too well and too cheaply. A method that fixes your land for a generation is a terrible business. A bag that lasts one summer is a beautiful business. So the slow, patient wisdom of clay and marl and living soil got pushed to the back shelf, and the front shelf filled up with plastic sacks and brand names and the comforting lie that your sand is just dead. I'm not telling you fertilizer is evil. I'm telling you it was sold to you as the only answer when it was really the most profitable answer. And there is a difference. That difference has cost you money every single year you've owned a shovel. I found clay. You'd be surprised how close it is. In many desert and dry regions, there's a layer of clay sitting just below the loose surface sand, sometimes only a foot or two down. Dig a hole. If you hit ground that's dense, sticky when wet, and holds its shape when you squeeze a wet handful into a ball, that's your clay, and it's free. If you don't have it on your land, a pottery supply or a landscaping yard sells natural clay for a few dollars, and you need far less than you'd think. Here's the test that changed my mind forever. I took a bucket of my worthless sand and mixed in clay until it was somewhere around a fifth to a quarter of the volume, not half. You don't want to make brick. You want the clay grains to fill the gaps and coat the sand. I wet it, worked it in, and planted the same kind of tomato that had died on me a dozen times. I watered it once every 3 days instead of twice a day, and it held. The water stayed. The leaves stayed green. That plant didn't just survive the desert summer. It gave me more tomatoes than I could eat. I stood there looking at it, feeling like an absolute fool. 20 years, hundreds of dollars a season, and the answer was buried 2 feet under the very sand I'd been cursing. But clay alone was only half of what I learned. Because holding water is one thing, holding life is another. And the sand still had a second problem I hadn't solved yet. That second problem nearly stopped me, because even with clay mixed in, my sand had almost no organic matter, no decayed plant material, no dark, crumbly richness that real soil has. Clay gave the ground a grip on water and nutrients, but there were barely any nutrients there to grip in the first place. It was like building a beautiful cupboard and having nothing to put in it. This is the wall most people hit, and it's the wall that sends them right back to the store for another bag. I almost went back myself, but the old farmers had this figured out too, and their answer cost nothing. Now, I want to talk directly to some of you for a minute, because right about now, a certain kind of person is telling themselves this isn't for them. Maybe you're thinking you're too old to be out there digging clay pits. Maybe you're thinking you don't have the time or the strong back or some special ingredient you'd have to order. Maybe you've been burned by so many gardening promises that you've decided the desert just won, and that's that. This next part is for you, specifically you, because I'm going to give you something you can do tonight before you go to bed with things already sitting in your kitchen and your yard that costs nothing and requires no digging and no strength at all. Here it is. Start a simple in-ground pocket. Take a coffee can or an old pot, anything about the size of a large jar. In one spot of your sandy ground, dig out a small hole just the depth of that container, which you can do sitting on a stool if you need to. Now line the bottom with whatever kitchen scraps you generated today. Coffee grounds, vegetable peels, a crushed eggshell, the ends of the carrots, torn up cardboard from a cereal box. Then take a single handful of that dense subsurface clay, or a spoonful of natural clay powder mixed with water into a slurry and pour it over the scraps. Cover it with the sand you dug out, wet it down. That's it. That's the whole thing tonight. Once I understood that, I couldn't unsee it. Every bag I'd ever bought flashed through my mind like a receipt I'd never stop paying. If this way of thinking about the land resonates with you, I put together a digital book that lays out this entire approach from the ground up. It's called First Wins, and it's part of a fuller system I've written called Deep Leverage in the Full System, where I go through every method in detail with diagrams, step-by-step sequences, and the troubleshooting that took me years to figure out on my own. Everything is in the description below if you want to work through it at your own pace, away from the screen, with the full picture in your hands instead of scattered across a playlist. So I decided to test the old way, and here is exactly what I did, so you can do it too. What you've just built is a tiny buried factory. The kitchen scraps are food for worms and microbes. The clay is the anchor that holds the moisture, so those microbes can actually live and work instead of drying out and dying. In the sand alone, those scraps would dry to nothing and blow away. Wrapped in clay and buried, they rot down slowly into the exact dark, living richness your sand has been missing. In a few weeks, you dig into that pocket, and you'll find it damp, dark, and alive when everything around it is still pale dust. You made real soil out of garbage and dirt while you slept. You didn't buy anything. You didn't lift anything heavy. You didn't need a single skill you don't already have. And you just proved to yourself, in 1 square foot, that the story about dead sand was a lie. Do that in a dozen little pockets across a season, and you've seeded your whole plot with points of life that spread outward. This is exactly how the old-timers built gardens where there was no garden center to save them. Small, patient, free, working with the ground instead of against it. But here's the thing. Even this, as good as it is not the most powerful version of what I found, because there is one method discovered in the most unlikely place on earth that doesn't just improve poor soil. It creates soil so rich and so permanent that scientists are still studying it in disbelief today, and it was almost lost completely. Let me tell you about the black earth. In the 1950s, a young Dutch soil scientist named Wim Sombroek was traveling deep in the Amazon rainforest. Now, everyone assumed the Amazon had rich soil because look how much grows there. But the truth is the opposite. Most Amazon soil is terrible. It's thin, sour, and washed out by endless rain. So poor that when the trees are cleared, the ground goes barren in a couple of seasons. But Sombroek kept finding patches that were completely different. Great stretches of ground that were deep, black, and unbelievably fertile. The local people farmed these patches easily, growing crops the surrounding land could never support. They had a name for it, terra preta, Portuguese for black earth. In 1966, Sombroek published his findings in a book called Amazon Soils, and he laid out something that turned soil science on its head, that black earth was not natural. It was made by human hands between roughly 2,000 and in some places more than 8,000 years ago. The people living there built that soil deliberately. And the more scientists studied it, the more astonishing it got. Because that soil, made thousands of years ago, is still black, still fertile, still rich. After thousands of years of some of the heaviest rainfall on the planet, rain that should have stripped it bare centuries ago, ordinary rich soil fades in a few years. This soil has held its fertility for thousands. So what on earth did those people put in the ground that made it last that long? The answer is the secret I promised you at the very start. And it is so simple and so cheap that once you know it, you'll wonder how it was ever forgotten. Charcoal, not the briquettes soaked in lighter fluid, real charcoal. Wood burns slowly with very little air, so that instead of turning to ash, it turns to black, porous carbon. Scientists today call it biochar. The Amazon people made it in smoldering pits and worked it into the ground along with their kitchen and household waste, their fish bones, their broken pottery, their manure and ash, and that charcoal is the reason the black earth never died. Here's why it works, and this is the beautiful part. A single piece of that charcoal under a microscope looks like a sponge made of stone. It is riddled with millions of tiny hollow chambers, the old structure of the wood preserved in carbon. That structure gives one small handful of charcoal an internal surface area larger than a basketball court. All those chambers grip water, they grip nutrients, and they become permanent housing for the microbes and fungi that make soil alive. The charcoal doesn't rot away like compost does. It stays in the ground for hundreds, even thousands of years, working the entire time. Think about what that means for your sand. Sand's whole problem is that it holds nothing. Water runs through. Nutrients wash away, there's no home for life. Charcoal is the exact opposite. It's all grip and all shelter. Put charcoal into sand, and you've given that dead ground a permanent skeleton that holds water, holds food, and houses life. Not for one season. For the rest of your life and your grandchildren's lives, this is the missing piece. Clay gives your sand the ability to hold water. Organic scraps give it food. And charcoal gives it a permanent, living structure that never washes away. Put those three together and you are not amending sand anymore. You are building terra preta in your own backyard, using the exact recipe a people worked out thousands of years ago and that a Dutch scientist wrote down for the world in 1966. And here is how you make it this weekend. With no special equipment, you can make charcoal in a hole in the ground, dig a pit, fill it with dry branches, brush, old untreated wood, corn stalks, whatever dry woody material you have. Light it at the top and let it burn down. When the flames have burned through and it's mostly glowing black coals, before it turns to gray ash, you douse it with water and smother it. The trick is stopping the burn while it's still black carbon, not letting it cook all the way down to ash. What you pull out is charcoal. Let it dry, then break it up small. The smaller the better. Now, one crucial step the old texts and the modern science both agree on. Do not put fresh charcoal straight into your garden. Fresh charcoal is so hungry it will actually pull nutrients out of your soil at first, robbing your plants while it fills up its own empty chambers. You have to charge it first. Soak your broken charcoal in something rich. Compost tea, diluted manure, even the liquid from your kitchen scrap pocket. Let it sit a week or two and soak up all that goodness. Now the sponge is full, and when you put it in the ground, it gives instead of takes. Then you mix it in, charcoal, clay, and your organic scraps worked into the sand together. That's the whole recipe. That's terra preta. That's ground that gets richer every year instead of poorer, and that you will never have to buy in a bag again. I made my first batch in a fire pit out behind my shed, feeling half certain the neighbors thought I'd lost my mind. I charged it in a barrel of compost water for 2 weeks. I dug it into a bed of pure clay mixed sand along with a season's worth of kitchen scraps, and the following summer that bed grew squash so thick I was giving it away by the armload. 3 years later, I've never retreated that bed. It just keeps producing. The soil is dark now. It smells like soil. It holds together in my hand, on ground that used to be nothing but pale blowing sand. That's the whole journey. That's what took me 20 years and hundreds of wasted dollars to stumble into, and I just handed it to you in a few minutes. Let me pull it together so you have the full picture in order, because I want you to walk away tonight with a plan, not just a story. First, understand that your sand is not dead. It is missing ingredients, exactly as Columella wrote in the 1st century. It cannot hold water and it cannot hold food. Everything else follows from fixing those two things. Second, add clay. Find it below your surface sand or buy a little cheaply. Mix it in at roughly 1/5 to 1/4 of your soil volume. This alone will transform how your ground holds water, the same practice English farmers called marling and relied on for centuries, a treatment that lasted decades from a single application. Third, add life. Bury your kitchen scraps wrapped in clay in small pockets, starting with the one you can build tonight. That builds the organic richness the sand has never had. Fourth, and most powerful, make charcoal, charge it in something rich, and work it in. That gives your soil a permanent structure that holds water, food, and life for generations. That is the terra preta secret, hidden in the Amazon and written down in 1966, and now it's yours. Do those things and you stop renting fertility by the season. You own it. The ground works for you instead of against you, And the money you used to hand over every spring stays in your pocket where it belongs. I think about that yellow, crisp tomato plant a lot. I remember believing the land had beaten me. It hadn't. I just didn't know what the land was asking for. It was asking for the same three things soil has always asked for. The things a Roman farmer knew, an English farmer knew, and a people in the Amazon knew thousands of years before any of us. We didn't lose that knowledge because it failed. We lost it because someone realized there was more money in selling us the same bag every spring than in teaching us to fix our ground once. You just got it back. Something that was quietly taken from you, handed over the back fence, the way it always used to be. If you're the kind of person who trusts a handful of your own soil more than a promise printed on a plastic sack, who would rather fix a thing once than pay for it forever, then this was made for you, and you already knew in your gut that dead sand was too simple a story to be true. So let me ask you something, and I really do want you to answer. When you dig down into your own ground, do you hit that dense, sticky clay layer below the sand, or is it sand all the way down where you live? Tell me in the comments what you find when you dig, because it tells the rest of us a lot about your land, and I read them. Don't just think it, type it out and leave it below. This audience is quiet, and I'm asking you directly to say something this time. And if you want to keep recovering the things our grandparents knew and we somehow agreed to forget, come along with the rest of us who are digging this old knowledge back up one method at a time. Because next I'm going to show you the forgotten way people kept vegetables fresh for months through the winter without a refrigerator and without electricity, using nothing but sand, a box, and one thing they buried it all under. You already own everything you'd need, you just don't know the trick yet. Stick around and you will. This video gave you the overview, but the full sand to farmland method, step by step, is waiting inside the practical wisdom circle. There, you can ask me your own question about your own ground, and I answer you myself, a real person, not a machine. You won't be doing this alone. You belong here with us. Just point your phone's camera at the code on the screen, and you can cancel anytime.